A man named Ananias, with the consent of his wife Sapphira, sold a piece of property. With his wife's knowledge, he kept back some of the proceeds and brought only a part and laid it at the apostles' feet. Ananias, Peter asked, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit, keep back part of the proceeds of the land? While it remained unsold, it didn't remain your own, and after it was sold, were not the proceeds at your disposal? How is it that you've contrived this deed in your heart? You didn't only lie to us, but to God. Now when Ananias heard these words, he fell down and died. Great fear seized upon all who heard it. Young men came, wrapped up his body, carried him out, buried him. After an interval of about 3 hours, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Peter said to her, tell me whether you and your husband sold the land for such and such a price. And he said, yes. She said, yes, that was a price. Peter said to her, how is it that you've agreed together to put the Spirit of the Lord to the test? Look, the feet of those who buried your husband are at the door. They'll carry you out. Immediately she fell down at his feet and died. When young men came in, they found her dead, and they carried out her body and they buried her beside her husband. This is the word of the Lord. It bothers me a little bit that as I was reading this account of the death of two of our prominent members at a church meeting, that you laughed, that you thought this was funny. Well, I'm telling you, you need to think about this text when you're filling out your pledge card, okay? But it is funny. It's just a kind of absurd. Ananias, were you honest about your financial gift to the church? And Ananias said, yeah. And he drops dead. And young men come right in, drag him out, bury him. And a little later in the meeting, his wife shows up. Peter says, answer carefully. Did you lie about your financial situation with the church? And she said, no. Young men come in, sweaty young men. And they drag her out and bury her too. And I love that phrase, great fear came upon everybody who heard about it. Right. If it's a funny story, if it's a kind of a joke, I mean, who is the joke on here? The thing that really grabs me about this story is it's not really a story about money. If you will note, Peter does not accuse Ananias and Sapphira of greed or materialism or miserliness. He says, you lied. You lied to God. The Holy Spirit, you expect Ananias to say, wait a minute, all right, we may have fudged a little bit with the church officials, but no, in church, to lie to the community of faith it's like lying to God. Peter accuses Ananias and Sapphira of lying, and it's deadly. Now, I want you to know that I have never killed anybody at a church meeting. Maybe I've thought about it, but usually only with trustees. And the reason is that I am so much more loving and caring and compassionate a pastoral leader than St. Peter. Did Peter have to be so direct? Hey, Peter, you know, you get to know these people. Sure, they've got a lot of resources, but if you look back, they're poor, struggling sinners just like all the rest of us. They've had a hard time too, okay? I asked him about his wealth. He said, my daddy only gave me $1 million, and I've made all the rest of it with my hard work. You know, isn't it very interesting how money and self-deceit seem to go together? I'm not all that rich. Oh, I'm on a fixed income. Or it's getting harder every day to put bread on the table. These days. It's interesting how self-deceit and money go together. And I've never had anything like this happen at one of my meetings that I presided at because I have compassion with people. I care about people. I wonder if Peter would say, no, you've just settled for a lower definition of church than we had. Because back in the day, church was not only a place of friendliness and warmth and compassion and caring, it was a place of truth. It was a place you had to get dressed and come down at an inconvenient hour of the day because you could hear truth that we just couldn't hear anywhere else in town. I'm afraid that I'm guilty sometimes of wanting to please, of wanting to be approved, cajole, flatter, then I care about the truth. And I think this text says that's deadly. It's deadly to individuals who are trying to follow Jesus, and it's deadly to the church. I know when I graduated from seminary, came back to South Carolina in 1971, I thought as a young Methodist pastor I was going into a war. Put me on the front lines. Most of the people I admired in ministry, a lot of them had been hurt for working for Jesus. One of them had a cross burned on his yard one Saturday night, just as a warning about the sermon. Another one of my friends, been in ministry a while, his wife had been accosted in the supermarket, virtually driven out of the supermarket because of a sermon he had preached the week before. But somehow between that and today, I'm afraid I kind of settled down and limited ministry to kind of hand-holding and words of comfort and approval and to lessen the stress and helping everybody just center and kind of. Well, I think this text says, be careful, because that can be the death of a church. Why are you here this morning? Oh, well, First Scots is a really friendly church, and I like the people there, and they like me, and I come and. Or, well, I just kind of come out of habit. I've been here for years, and it's kind of my church. And I noticed you earlier in the service, your attractive young associate stood up, and he said to you, we find security in things. We're tempted and trapped by senseless, harmful desires. We become indifferent to the plight of our brothers and sisters. We lose touch with God. And I thought, ooh, be careful. They're paying your salary. Stop. Watch it. Then I watched you, and you stood up and said, okay, got that right. Yeah, that's us. We agree with all that. You said it in unison. Maybe you're here this morning for purposes more noble than simply to get a pat on the head. But maybe you're here to get the truth. And it's deadly when we don't. We live in a culture of vast deceit and lies. And maybe this is free space God has created where we can tell the truth and hear the truth. One of my friends became a marriage counselor, and he deals with people. Most of his practice is when marriages are dissolving. And I said, I read the other day that a major cause for marital stress is money, arguments about money. Have you found that to be true in your practice? And my friend said, no, I'd say it's more marriages disintegrate over truth. I said, in what way? He said, well, my theory is, when you get married, both of you just think each other are wonderful, and he's just great, and I love him. But you get into marriage, you start to really get to know these people. And he said, these people really know you as you are. They know the truth about you. This spouse who sleeps next to you. And in a marital argument, she can pull that stuff out and use it against you. And you will do the same against her. And then what happens? And he said, I find that if you just want to be married and you don't want to know the truth about yourself, you separate. You find easier relationships. But I say to couples, if you're willing to live with, to make love to raise children with somebody who knows the truth about you, and you still try to love that person, marriage can make you a much better person than you would have been. Had a man in my church, suffered from alcohol addiction. A bunch of us ganged up on him. We got him to go to AA. And he took the cure. And it was wonderful. He sobered up. It was amazing. But I noticed he stopped coming to church. So I said to him, George, we're glad that you got to AA and everything, and we just celebrate it's just wonderful. But why don't you come to church anymore? And he said, preacher, not to be critical, but when you've been in that AA group and they have stripped you naked, and you've been told the truth by somebody you don't like, and they have told you more truth in that evening than you have heard in your whole life about yourself, well, you come to church and it just seems so damn superficial. Like this kind of conspiracy of niceness. And preacher, I couldn't have gotten well if somebody hadn't loved me enough to tell me the truth. The poet T.S. Eliot said, why should people love the church? Because she tells them of sin and death and other unpleasant facts we'd love to forget. And the weird thing is that I think you're here this morning for that. And I don't think our main concern is money any more than it is about sex or it's our main concern is truth. And I don't know that I'm the best preacher for this kind of thing. I mean, look at me. I was elected president of my school class every year from the 7th grade on. And as any politician can tell you, you don't get elected by being truthful. But unfortunately, God called me to be a preacher. When I weigh myself on the bathroom scales in the morning, I always am careful to weigh myself fully clothed. And I stand there and I say, wow, these are heavy clothes. Look at these clothes. I've got on heavy clothes today. But pray for me, because though I would like to be liked and I love to be loved, I think God has called me to work with a text like we have for today. Jesus stands before his disciples and he says, I am the way, I am the life, I'm the truth. And nobody gets to God except by this way.